The sad reality is a lot of people own horses and they never realize that their horse is dealing with a medical condition. I remember when I purchased my first horse, I would stress out so much about whether or not there was something wrong with my horse because I heard people say things like, oh, the horse has a dull coat or the horse's weight isn't right, but I didn't exactly know how to recognize those things. So in today's video, I'm going to walk through how to recognize if your horse may be dealing with something and may not be healthy. A great place to start in terms of evaluating your horse's health is to look at the body conditioning scale for your horse. So this is a scale rated 1 through 9 that vets use, and they use it to place your horse and say whether your horse is healthy, a healthy weight with healthy muscle, or whether they're thin or overweight or anything like that. So I'm going to just read through the qualifications for each score, and we'll show some pictures of what a horse may look like in that specific score so you can start recognizing where your horse goes. Number 1 is considered very poor, and these horses are going to be extremely emaciated. Their bone structure is going to be obvious, no fat on the horse. I've unfortunately seen these horses coming out of severe neglect situations. They basically look like skeletons. Number 2 isn't much better, where the horse is still very thin. You can clearly see the ribs and the spine and the bones, and there's very minimal fat. So you still see the skeletal structure, like you're seeing the horse's hips stick out, the withers stick out, their ribs, their spine, everything like that. Number 3 is thin, where you're going to see slight fat over the ribs, but the horse is still very ribby. The backbone is still going to be visible, where you can see like the indents of the vertebrae, and then the hip bones are still noticeable, but on number 3, you have more fat on the horse. Number 4 is starting to get into the midsection, where your horse is going to be considered more healthy, even though there are certain things to recognize. So for number 4, your horse is moderately thin. Their ribs are going to be visible, but not necessarily prominent. And then they're going to have some muscle, but they could be lacking muscle. So this is seen in a lot of young horses. Young horses are growing, and so it's harder to keep weight on them. They may be a little ribby, and then they haven't developed their muscles yet. So you can definitely see, where a horse needs to develop muscles in their neck and their back. To me, that's the most prevalent places, and through their hindquarters, like their hindquarters will be more triangular rather than round. Number 5 is considered perfect, a perfect body condition for your horse. We'll say this is a moderate body condition. You have ribs that can be felt but not seen. So if you run your hand or your finger over your horse's side, you can feel the ribs, but when you stand back and look, you cannot see them. The back is going to have muscle and look supported and be healthy. And this is considered an overall healthy horse. Number 6 is once again still in that mid-range where the horse is healthy, but now you're starting to get into a little bit of excess. So a moderately fleshy horse, they're slightly fat. You maybe cannot feel their ribs. Their back may be more like straight across and soft, and they're going to have more of a rounded appearance. So Ruach, my horse, I would consider probably a number 6. He definitely has some fat on him. Number 7, we're starting to get out of that mid-range. Now we are totally into the excessive side of this, where the horse is more fat, which is also just as unhealthy as a horse being skinny. A number 7 is going to be a very fleshy horse. There's going to be noticeable fat over the ribs and behind the shoulder. The neck may have creases, and then fat deposits on the neck and withers. So you may see fat starting to develop along the top of your horse's neck, where the top of their neck is just really wiggly, and it's like a fat pocket. Number 8 is considered just overall fat. So the ribs are going to be hard to feel under the fat, even if you pry your finger in there. There's going to be creases along the back, large fat deposits on the neck and the withers and the tail. What I say about fat deposits, because sometimes people can't recognize them, it's like if you get stung by a mosquito, and you have this bulge on you and that kind of looks weird. A fat deposit just looks like that on a horse, but it is like big. Or like you may just have parts where the horse is bulging out, like their butt. You can really see fat deposits. Number 9, so this is our last number on the score, is extremely fat. So obvious fat deposits everywhere, difficult to feel the ribs, they're large, they're bulging appearance. This is very unhealthy for your horse. It's going to affect their joints. They're going to be at risk of laminitis and founder. So like I said, a number 5 is the ideal score for your horse. So hopefully with these pictures, you can kind of identify where your horse is at. The reason your horse's weight does play such a big part into their health is because depending on their weight can depend on their health condition. So for example, if you have a really thin horse, they're obviously lacking nutrients. There may be something else wrong with them. We had a rescue horse, well, he was a miniature horse, that no matter what we did, he could not put weight or muscle on him. So there was obviously something else going on. And the fact of the matter is with these types of horses, they have just a harder time. If anything comes their way, like if they do get sick or get a virus or something, they're gonna have a harder time fighting it. If the weather gets really bad in the winter, they're gonna have a harder time in the winter. So that's why you see a lot of people put down older horses before the winter, because a lot of times older horses don't have the weight or the muscle or just the liveliness to get through hard weather. So that's just something to consider. On the other end of this, fat horses are just as unhealthy as skinny horses, except they're on the other end of the spectrum. With fat horses, obviously, being overweight is gonna hurt your joints, but that is just one thing fat horses have to deal with. The biggest risk to fat horses is laminitis and founder. This is where sometimes horses can be fat because they have like an insulin resistance, just like humans. Another piece to this is how horses' hooves react with sugar. So if your horse is obscenely fat, they are eating way too much sugar, you know? And so with sugar, it goes down into your horse's feet and it causes the tissues in the hooves to become inflamed, and that's called laminitis. It's very uncomfortable for the horse. If left untreated and you let this problem go, laminitis eventually becomes founder, and this is where the tissues in the hoof weaken to the point where the bone within the hoof starts to rotate and turn and drop. It's extremely painful, and sometimes horses have to be put down. So both ends of the spectrum are bad news. You want to be kind of in the middle at that 5. Another way to tell if your horse may have a health condition is abnormalities in their coat, their skin, and their hooves. So a lot of times you'll hear people say a dull coat is a sign of an unhealthy horse. You may be wondering, like, what in the world does that mean? And here's an example I have for you. If you look out at your horse in the field and their coat usually looks sleek or shiny, even in the winter when they're long and shaggy, their coat will still have like a shine to it. But when you have a dull coat, it just looks grimy and like faded. And with our miniature horse who had a lot of health conditions, that was a good example of a dull coat where if you touched him or pet him, his coat just felt so like dirty and grimy. Even if I bathed him every single week, it still felt like that, and it looked like that too. There was no shine to his coat. So that's just one example I can give you as to a dull coat. Usually it's also gonna feel different, like it will just feel dirty compared to a normal horse's coat that feels like, you know, sleek and shiny. Horses can have a lot of different skin conditions, and they kind of vary about whether it is simply just a skin condition or if it's a deeper problem. So that really comes down to you talking to your vet. But it's important to be aware of skin conditions. Like if your horse is losing hair, that's usually a sign that there's something else going on, that maybe they're having an allergic reaction or they're detoxing from something. I remember being young, some of my friends would get off the track thoroughbreds and they were just pumped with bad things. So the horses would have to detox coming off the track, and a lot of times they would lose their hair. And so that's just one thing to note. Make sure you keep an eye on that and contact your vet if your horse is losing their hair. Lastly, the condition of your horse's feet is another great example if your horse may be missing some nutrients. So if your horse is missing vital nutrients to their diet, the feet will show it, and usually this may look like the foot just being very flaky. And I remember visually seeing it on my horse's feet once where it just kind of looked like ripples of flakes on their feet. And it turned out they did have a nutrients deficiency that I had to supplement. Being mindful of that and listening to your farrier when they point those things out. Also, making sure your horse's feet are trimmed properly, because the longer your horse's feet get, the more it affects their health. Your horse's hooves actually help a lot with circulation. And so you want to keep the hooves healthy in order to keep the horse healthy. And so making sure you keep the feet trimmed like they need to be, that way you're not affecting that circulation. If your horse is experiencing discharge, this is usually a sign that there's something else going on. So anywhere on the horse's face, really, if your horse is discharging from the nose, that is a sign of an infection. And if they do have a lot of snot up in there, I would be sure to take their temperature and see if their temperature is normal. For horses, that's like 99 to 101 degrees, kind of, it's the normal body temperature. But yeah, that's usually a sign of an infection. The horse's eyes are very fragile, and so if your horse has runny eyes, I would recommend calling the vet immediately. You do not want your horse to get a scratch in their eye and have an ulcer in their eye, because it can turn into a much bigger deal if you don't treat it quickly. And on top of that, there are eye conditions like recurrent uveitis, where it may just be something your horse deals with their whole life. And so knowing how to handle that and how to deal with it. Recurrent uveitis can be caused by other things in the horse's body, but for the most part, a lot of the times it is genetic, and so that would be another thing to consult the vet. Lastly, drool. So in America, our horses eat clover and they drool every summer, and that's pretty normal across America. But there are instances where your horse drooling could be a sign of something else. So I remember one time Tucker got a massive ulcer in his mouth, and he was drooling from it, and I just thought he was drooling because of clover, because it was that time of year. But then, just by happenstance, I lifted up his lip, and I saw a giant ulcer up in his lip, and I realized that's why he had been drooling. So that's something to know, especially because, horses' teeth are always growing, so they can create wounds in the mouth. Another instance, unfortunately, is if your horse is having digestive problems or something's happening with their digestive system, it can cause drooling. I remember with Yoshi, our miniature horse, he gave us the full array of health problems that we learned from. But towards the end of his life, his digestive system was kind of paralyzing or something. And so he was salivating a lot and he was just drooling all the time. So we did have to end up putting him down, but that was just one thing he had to deal with. Another thing to look for to determine your horse's health is your horse's gait. So this is how they move. We have walk, trot, canter, and then we also have gaited horses that amble and pace and things like that. Really, to notice if your horse is off or lame or limping or whatever you want to call it, a good indication is to look at their head and see if they're bobbing their head really excessively on a certain step, because that can be a sign of lameness. Another thing is if you're riding your horse and they just feel off, and you can just tell within the movement, okay, this doesn't feel normal, that could mean they're off as well. Lameness can show up in different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean that your horse is limping excessively. It could also mean that maybe they're just tripping a lot, or they're just getting hung up in their feet and things like that. So it can show up in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't always mean that there's something wrong with your horse's legs. If your horse is off or lame, it could mean that maybe they have a neurological problem, unfortunately, something going on in their brain. Or maybe they have back pain. I remember when I had Tucker and he had grown a little bit, suddenly my saddle wasn't fitting him anymore. And the reason I figured it out is because he was off all the time, he just wasn't moving right. And so then I tested his back and he was very sore in his back. So even soreness in the back can lead to lameness. And that's important to realize. It's any pain within the body, the horse kind of tries to make up for at different points of their body. And so the whole body can end up being affected. Now, this is perhaps the biggest indication that your horse may have other health conditions, and that is anxiety in your horse. Some horses are just more chill, and then you get these horses that they just seem anxious all the time. And like with humans, anxiety kind of builds upon itself, and it definitely generates health conditions, stress-induced health conditions. And so I have seen horses experience this a lot, unfortunately. And some horses may have anxiety just in specific situations, but there are definitely horses that may just seem anxious all the time. If your horse is weaving in the stall and just walking back and forth, if they seem depressed and they're just out in the field and they seem mopey and just nervous all the time, those are good indications you may be dealing with a horse like this. So one very common health condition that derives from this is ulcers. Ulcers in the horse's stomach, they can be extremely painful for your horse, and they're not fun to deal with. They can lead to colic and other things. So I just want to point out some reasons your horse may be stressed or anxious. Number one is if they don't have any friends and they're just kept by themselves, that can lead a lot of times to anxiety or depression. Number two is if they are in with a new herd and they don't know the horses. I remember one of my first horses, Pepper. She was very, very particular about the horses she was in with. And if we put her in with a different herd, she would get depressed and she would stay off to herself. She would not want to interact with the other horses. But when we put her in with this specific herd, she was fine and she had friends. And so it just took us time figuring out what was best for her until we were able to kind of combat that anxiety. Number three is new environments. So my horse Tucker, he was very stressed out in new environments for a long time. The way I got him over this, and not every horse is like this, but the way I got him over this is we just went someplace new every weekend until finally he just got over it and he accepted it. So that's how I dealt with him on that. And then another piece of this is if the horse just isn't enjoying work, work can become very anxiety inducing for them. So the primary goal for an anxious horse is to help them feel secure, like the examples I gave. You may need to find the perfect herd for them. You may need to get them a buddy. You may need to just help them work through different things like I had to do with Tucker. But overall, if you can help that horse just feel more comfortable and secure, you can kind of start to alleviate some of the health conditions you may be seeing. A great starting place for this is to build trust with your horse. So I have an online course that walks you through a bunch of different concepts you need to know and how to interact with your horse and also how to help your horse through stressful situations. And the reason I created that course is because with my horse Tucker, I had to learn how to help him with his anxiety. And so I have put everything in that course that I did with him and that I know to do with horses like that. And I have seen great success with Tucker. So if you want to check that out, the link is at the description. It's at shop.equinehelper.com and it's how to build trust with your horse.